Thank you, everyone. Welcome to Southeast Uplift's Back to Basic workshop on equity and accessibility and community engagement. We are just so thrilled that you all would come out tonight and join us. I am Machi Williams, the neighborhood planner and liaison manager at Southeast Uplift. I'm joined here with my colleague, Alex.
I'm the partnerships and grant making programs manager at Southeast Uplift.
And we have the honor of our executive director, Nancy, with us here tonight, too.
Hi, everyone. Nancy Champlin, executive director. Good to see everybody.
So the Southeast Uplift Neighborhood Coalition, we're an independent nonprofit established in 1968 that builds grassroots civic engagement and fosters community involvement through our various programs and initiatives. And so the Back to Basics is a pilot workshop series to build the capacity of community groups so that they can consciously engage in civic matters through the series of workshops and have the tools to engage effectively with their community. Captions are enabled for tonight's workshop. As I mentioned, we are recording this so people can review it for later information. If you do not see the captions, you can click the CC box at the bottom of your device or screen to enable them. And should that not be visible, you can click on the More option on your device and navigate to captions from there. So some of the goals of Back to Basics. Our first workshop, we're trying to find common ground on divisive topics by navigating complex conversations and application of meeting facilitation skills.
And to promote equity and accessibility in event planning, meetings, and communications.
And build trust and respect within your community while challenging conventional ways of thinking and implicit bias.
As well as weave family narratives and local history into local planning processes.
And finally, strengthen relationships using trauma-informed communications to build your social connections within the community. And so we have a few more trainings coming up this month. You can go to our website, southeastuplift.org, to sign up for them. The next two are building trust for racial equity advocacy, and then the week after that, honoring history's building equity, a workshop in historical lens planning. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our presenters tonight.
Thank you, Machu. So hi, everybody. My name is Diane Odeh, and I'm joined by Jess Homer. Today, we're going to talk to you about equity and accessibility and community engagement. We like to let you know what you're getting into today in today's workshop. So we're going to start with introductions. So that's going to be introductions of who's presenting to you today, but also introductions of the people in the quote unquote room today. Then we're going to talk about definition. So what does it mean to be equitable? What does accessibility really mean? How are those defined? Then we're going to talk about what that looks like in community engagement practices. Then we're going to talk about best practices and considerations you should make. So in essence, what should you start keeping an eye on? What should you look for in your practices? Then we'll get into how to audit your current process, meaning how do I look at it now that I know these things? How can I look over what I'm currently doing and seeing how I can enhance and refine my practices with the goals of equity and accessibility in mind? Then we will develop some goals to take action. So we'll do a step-by-step process to develop, we call them SMARTY goals to take action. And then we'll just have a Q&A to answer some questions. And we did have a question come through the workshop registration that we'll answer maybe within the slides, but if not, we'll definitely get to them during the Q&A. So you may be wondering, why are we talking to you today? Who are we? So my name is Diane Odeh. I have a master's of public administration degree, but I'm also currently a PhD student at Portland State University. I'm studying social equity as it pertains to civic engagement, organizations, and also ethics. My dissertation is focused primarily on neighborhood associations. And I've done a lot of work in social equity. I've worked as a social equity consultant. I've done a lot of different projects related to evaluating organizations with an equity lens. So that's kind of where I'm coming at you at. That's the lens I'm bringing in today. And what about you, Jess?
Hi all, I am Jess Homer. I'm an attorney licensed in Florida, which means anything I tell you today is life advice, not legal advice. There we go. I'm also a certified compliance and ethics professional, which is through the Society for Corporate Compliance and Ethics, which means that I do a lot of work dealing specifically with the intersection of compliance, equity, and ethics. I have a master's degree in leadership and organizational change, and also have a certificate in local government management. In my current roles today, in present time, is I am a ADA coordinator for a city. I teach disability law, I teach business law, and I am part of Moxie Mediation, and I investigate complaints of discrimination, harassment in organizations, as well as trainings in issues of equity, inclusion, and compliance. So nice meeting you all. So for our friends in here, you're more than welcome to jump off of and speak, or you can write in the chat what's bringing you here, what's interesting about this topic to you. And really, most importantly, is if you are with a specific group, so that we can make sure, like whether it's nonprofit or whether you're part of a community organization, or what brings you here, so that we can make sure we guarantee that you have some geared information today.
Are we popcorn?
Yeah, go ahead.
I could just say, so I'm Christina DiTullo. I'm with the Reed Neighborhood Association. And this is my first time serving on the board of a neighborhood association. So still learning the ropes, and I was just interested in this topic to know what more, our board can do around this topic. So
That's great. Thank you, Christina. Madeline?
Evening, everyone. Thank you for even putting on this workshop. I stumbled across it by chance because I'm taking Advocacy Fact Oregon parent training right now. And then I came across this in one of the emails with resources and stuff. And I was like, oh, I want to take this just because I want to learn more. Because right now I'm trying to learn different ways how to advocate for my son in different spaces, and then my daughter. So I thought this would be a great workshop just to attend and learn more from all of you. So I'm excited to be here this evening.
Great, thank you.
We're so excited that you're here too.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you all.
All right, so a bit of background before we get into the kind of nuts and bolts of the Americans with Disabilities Act space, of the Rehabilitation Act space, and of compliance, but then also how we can work this into some equity discussions, is really we want you to understand is that we all are a sum of a bunch of parts. So this is one version of the multitude of versions of intersectionality wheels or social identity wheels used in different equity talks. So if you've ever listened to any kind of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, social equity talk, you've probably seen something like this. But what I want to take away from it today is that each of us belong to many different social identities. So me, Jessica Homer, I am a woman, I am white, I am 42, I am outside able-bodied, inside a mess, right? Right? Like, so we all have different pieces that of our identity that define us. And each one of us can look at this chart and look at this circle and see and say, okay, so I'm a non-smoker. I have worked since I was 14. I am a direct communicator. I am, you know, like we can go through the whole identity wheel and fill it in. But realistically, even if every single one of us had the exact same answer, which is hopefully very unlikely, but very unlikely, even if we had the same answer, what we think is important is different, right? The things that we're proud of is different. And the things that cause us the most social inconveniences, or even so far as discrimination, prejudice, is different from each other, right? So we're going to talk with a big focus on accessibility and issues surrounding folks with disabilities today, but understand that there's a multitude of ways that a person presents in this world. And if we don't respect whole person and talk about whole person the whole conversation, then there really isn't a ton of point in having any of the conversation, right? So understand that when we talk about folks with disabilities, there's no monolith to that population, just as there's no monolith to any other of the social identities. And being cognizant of that right away from the jump of the conversation is incredibly important to us.
So I also want to add that in the context of this presentation, we are going to compartmentalize equity and accessibility a little bit, and that we're going to talk about equity. Then we're going to talk about accessibility. But the fact of the matter is that they are so tightly linked and intertwined. You can't have equity without accessibility. They have to coexist. One of the factors of equity is ensuring that you are that you do have accessible practices. So you may have seen this picture before, but I just want to describe it. So when we think about essentially the trajectory of equality, we used to use the term equality a lot in spaces, but now you're hearing the word equity come up a lot more than equality. So they may seem like they're the same. They both start with EQU, you know, but the fact of the matter is that they are different. So when you think about equality, that's the picture to the left. Equality is giving everyone the same exact resource, whether or not they need it or whether or not it benefits them. So as you see, the tall person doesn't necessarily need a box. So when you think about providing like a resource, they don't really need that box. And then on for the individual with the wheelchair, the box doesn't even work for them. So it's not the correct resource or a helpful resource for them. So in today's society, we're trying to move away from giving equal treatment to everybody, and we're focused on giving equitable treatment. And the idea behind this is that once you make things equitable, everybody has access to enjoy the same thing. So this is just like a soccer game, right? But if you think about in society, if I don't have the tools in the scope of community engagement, if I don't have the correct resources to show up to a community engagement event, then I'm not going to go. You may have given equal invitation to everybody, but did you give the resources that certain groups may need? So in the example on the right, that's an example of equity. As you see, the shorter person gets 2 boxes because that's what they need to meaningfully participate. And turns out the person in the wheelchair doesn't need a box at all. Instead, they need differentiated support. They need a ramp so they can all equally have access to the same benefit.
So let's get into the real nuts and bolts of accessibility defined. And I will say that all of these slides are accessible. You will get a copy of the slide deck and it will have, you know, the picture that Diane described to you will have alt text and stuff like that on it. I will warn you that in any time I'm closed captioned, if I say Americans with Disabilities Act, which is called the ADA, it will inevitably come out as 88, like the number. And that's just because of how I talk. So preparing you all for why you see 88, the number 88 so much today in your closed captioning. So when we talk about accessibility, we're really talking about 2 different tracks that are both highly important. On the compliance end, which is what we're going to spend a little time on in the next couple slides, federal law has requirements. Things like websites, businesses, government programs, and public spaces all need to be accessible. And that includes things like online websites, and it also includes things like telecommunication services. And those are all going to be governed by things like the Americans with Disabilities Act. In housing is an exemption under the Americans with Disabilities Act, which we call ADA, but the Department of Justice, which oversees the ADA, and the Housing and Urban Development, HUD, who oversees housing rules, right? They have together joined and created guidance that everyone has to pay attention to, and then the Rehabilitation Act. So then there's other ones, right? If we talk about school systems, we need 504 compliance, and there's different pieces that play, but there are plenty of laws that deal with accessibility. The Americans with Disabilities Act wasn't even written until 1990. Prior to that, there was some piecemeal disability laws that kind of came into space. But at their core, accessibility laws are civil rights laws. And that's really important to pay attention to. A lot of times in my work as advising people on the Americans with Disabilities Act is people often think that it's a choice, like, oh yeah, this would be better if we did this, but we don't really have to, right? It's like a speeding ticket. If you do something wrong, it's bad, but it's not that bad. But it's really important to understand that the Department of Justice is who goes after people when the ADA is violated. So it's a very serious set of laws. It's a very serious set of civil rights laws, and that's very important to pay attention to. But the other side of it is that written within the laws, which is very different than other civil rights laws, is issues of welcoming, belonging, and creating universal ability for people to enjoy the same access as their counterparts that don't have disabilities. So that is really important to keep in mind, that those two tracks very much intertwined with each other. So one good example of compliance versus inclusion is the idea of the modern wheelchair. So the ADA requires that doors are 32 inches wide, and to be compliant, doors only have to be 32 inches wide. However, the asterisk on that is that if a person needs more for a reasonable accommodation, you also have to provide that. Well, some wheelchairs are 30 inches wide, and you're like, cool, that's less than 32 inches. But think about this. There's a door hinge that takes about an inch of the door, right? And then my hands when I'm trying to wheel the chair, right? So now all of a sudden, because of the door hinge and me and my hands, we are now 33 inches, right? So that's problematic. And it means that even though it technically fits the requirements of compliance, the inclusion has been negated. I'll give you another example. I went to college with a very short friend, and she was, I think she was 28-ish inches, and the guidelines for locks, 36 inches fits within that guideline. So she was too short to reach the lock on the accessible bathroom. So she couldn't close the bathroom door in her own residence hall. And, we went to maintenance and we said, you got to fix this. I was her resident assistant. And for some reason, I was the one in charge of this, which if y'all work at a college, that was too advanced for a resident assistant, but it was good practice for me. So I went and I said, you got to fix this. And they're like, well, it's ADA compliant. And I'm like, but it's not fitting the needs of our students, right? At that time, because she couldn't reach that. And that was not going to, there's no way to kind of fix that. She needs to be able to lock the door in the bathroom. So those are some examples of, we have this compliance side, we have this mandatory inclusion side, but also we want to think of inclusion in a very broad way of really meeting the needs of everyone who needs it. So what is a disability? Oh, we'll ask questions after this. So what is a disability? A person with a disability is someone who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, or has a history or record of such impairment, like had cancer and now is in remission, or is perceived by others as having such an impairment. So like a person who has scars from a severe burn is an example of someone. We make a lot of assumptions when we see someone who has some kind of physical marking that would lead us to believe that they have a disability. So this is really important to understand. Unlike other civil rights laws, right? So we think about the Civil Rights Act written in the 60s. That's whole spiel was that you can't discriminate against people, but it didn't really say what that means. Because the Americans with Disabilities Act wasn't written until the 90s, it really kind of caught some problems with the Civil Rights Act. So one of the problems that we deal with in regular old, like every category discrimination is stereotyping, right? We know it's bad, we know it's wrong, but the laws aren't really solid on it. In disability law, it's very solid. If you're treating someone differently based on what you perceive them to be, right, the space of stereotyping, then that is in and of itself violative of the law, which is much different than what we deal with in other situations. So this slide deck has like a bunch of words that we don't really, okay, substantial limitation, what does that mean? Well, the courts say substantially limits is a broad interpretation. So we're thinking of any time that you have trouble with a basic need. So things like eating, sleeping, using the restroom, walking, seeing, hearing, being able to eat, right? Like food that everyone else is eating, right? Because you have a severe allergy. Those would all kind of broadly count as substantial limitations. And the most recent iterations of any of these disability laws really allow a broad spectrum to be covered. So it's not stuff like a mild allergy. Many of us have seasonal allergies, right? And we're coming onto that springtime. Those are terrible. Like, let's be clear. I don't want to take as much Zysol as I take on a regular. They're sponsoring? No, I'm just kidding. They're not. But that would not be considered a major life factor, right? We're thinking about the things that you do with everyday external and internal processes in your body. So some examples of that include, oh, I already said them all. Look at me being ahead of everything. Things like sensory functions, things like working, reading, learning, communication, and operation of major bodily functions. So does anyone have any questions about substantial limitations or the definition of disability?
I think one thing that came up earlier, you mentioned reasonable accommodation.
Sure.
That might be worth spelling out what that is for if you're not
Yeah,
aware.
for sure. And now I'm mixing up presentations, so if I have this slide later, then we'll skip it. I don't think I do that. So when we talk about, so there's two different categories of expectations depending on who is in charge. The Americans with Disabilities Act has 5 titles. Title I deals with employment. Title II deals with state, local, and federal government actors. Title III deals with private entities, and that would include nonprofits. Title IV deals with telecommunications, and Title V deals with stuff like retaliation, and that you're allowed to file a complaint and that you can't be retaliated. I know that that's hard for some people to like grapple with because it's not fun when someone complains about us, but you do need to give that option, and there does need to be a grievance process in state organizations anyway. So the reason I'm telling you all that is that government actors have to provide reasonable modifications. And that means that they have to really work to make sure everyone can participate all the time, right? So like a city, so I work for a city that it is decently funded by its residents. And in that, it means that if anyone calls at any time and says, I need a sign language interpreter, well, those cost a couple $100 an hour, but yeah, you still got to do it, right? We have to do, as government employees, the reasonable modification standard is, as long as it's not so unreasonable that it fundamentally alters the purpose of the program, you got to do it. On the other hand, reasonable accommodations, which are the things that private businesses have to do, caveat, when you're buildings, that's whole different. We will talk about that in a second. And employers, what they need to do is so long they need to work within their program to make sure, yes, that there's no fundamental alteration, and it's not so overly burdensome that it would impact the organization as a whole. I will say that budget is not often like an okay, there needs to be another reason besides budget. Because when the Department of Justice looks at your program, they're going to say, you have $1 million. What do you mean you can't do $200? And you'll be like, whoa, 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 my office gets $0 in budget. And the government will say, but your whole entity has $1 million. So suck it up, buttercup, right? Like that's what they say. So a lot of people jump to money right away when they talk about reasonable accommodations. That is like, it has to be a lot of money. It has to be a substantial part of your budget for you to make an argument that money is the only reason. You would have to also argue that it like unduly burdens the organization. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you for making that distinction between accommodations and modification and who it typically applies to too. Very helpful context.
You got it. All right. So there are different types of disabilities, and I put types in quotes here because, you know, there's layers upon layers upon layers. But if we break it down into kind of 4 main topics, we have visible, and that could include physical. So that's use of assisted devices like wheelchairs, canes for visibility issues. You can see someone, you can see by like the things that they use or the way that they're walking or the way that they're engaging, speaking, like those kind of things. It's immediately apparent. And visible physical disabilities are still always need to be accommodated, but they are often the only thing people think of a lot of times. You know, it's not a mistake, right? That the accessible parking spots, right? And that's like one little tip and caveat. We don't say handicap parking spots anymore. We say accessible parking spots. And accessible parking spots have a stick figure of a person in a wheelchair, right? And because that in the way that disability law has kind of formed has been the easiest way to identify, right? But that's a small part of the population that is in a wheelchair. And for sure, we always need to make sure that our roads are at our sidewalks are at proper slopes, right? They can only be a 5% hill grade and a 2% side grade, basically. And then if it's more than 5%, then there need to be rest stops. Like there's all these kind of rules in place where you have to have spaces that a wheelchair can accommodate. But a lot of people, I'm not saying it's the easiest thing to identify. I am saying it's the thing that people wrap their head around the easiest. So we have the physical disabilities, the visible physical disabilities, and then there are mixed physical and neurodivergent but visible disabilities. So things like certain neurodivergencies have some physical markers like Down syndrome where a person would be able to probably tell. And again, like I said before, when we talk about perception, you don't know someone has a disability until they say, Jessica, I need assistance, right? Like we have a problem in this, I think in this country, probably in the world, where we infantilize people with disabilities. We expect that they're unable to do things that they're fully capable of doing, but that is, so be careful with that, but it is something that has a visible marker and a neurodivergency. The other half is invisible, and some of those invisible disabilities are physical, things like Crohn's disease, cancer, HIV, AIDS, celiac, and other life-threatening allergies, you wouldn't necessarily know unless someone actually came out and told you, right? So I have some like pretty severe food allergies that make me severely ill if I eat something. And this is the thing, right? Celiac disease, you have to be on gluten for like 2 months before they can get the test. So I'm not testing because it hurts my whole body, right? So things like that that are invisible but physical often have like there's no way for you to ever know that unless the person discloses that to you. But if you're dealing with someone like a coworker or someone who's on your committee, for example, that says like, listen, there are some days that I'm just going to need to leave real quickly, or I need to be in close, like in Crohn's disease, I need to be close to a bathroom. And people often, why? Like, just walk, it's fine, right? You don't have anything wrong with you. And that's not necessarily the case. And then the last kind of subcategory would be the neurodivergent invisible disabilities. And that would include things from major depressive disorder, PTSD, autism spectrum disorder, and the other kind of, there's like, I think 20 something invisible neurodivergencies that could be on this list. So these are the kind of the main types of disabilities, but like I said, then they all have subcategories, right? So an major depressive disorder might really only affect someone's mood, but may not affect their like cognitive abilities, except in really bad days where they feel very foggy, right? And those kind of things, all these kind of different disabilities and all these different categories, what's really important to understand is, unlike many other civil rights issues we deal with, each one of these is so highly individualized to the person that a lot of times the frustration in making our spaces very accessible comes because we actually can't make a bright line rule. We can make a bright line rule that everyone needs curb cuts and that sidewalks should only be a certain slope, but we can't really make a bright line rule that says, okay, if the person has Crohn's disease, then we need to give them 13 days off a year, right? Like, because that might not be how their Crohn's acts up. And that's really important to know. Service animals, okay. Every single time I go to some training on accessibility, someone in the room asked this question, so I'm going to head it off. It doesn't matter if people lie to you. That's my answer. Okay, so we'll get back to the question. Service animals are any dog or highly individualized cases, miniature horses, that is individually trained to do work or perform tasks for the benefit of an individual with a disability, including a physical, sensory, psychiatric, intellectual, or mental disability. Other species of animals, whether wild or domestic, trained or untrained, are not service animals. They can be emotional support animals, and if housing units are required, to require them, and then certain specialized things. So like airplanes, there are a couple spaces that you need to be able to take emotional support animal, but in general, those will not be service animals. There is no service animal registry. They do not have to wear vests. And if you see a dog walk into a space where there's not quote unquote, supposed to be a dog, you can ask the person 2 questions. Question 1, is this animal required because of a disability? Not what disability, just are they required because of a disability? Yes or no question. And then question 2 is, what work or task has this animal been trained to perform? Those are the only 2 questions you're allowed to ask. Point blank, period, the end. It doesn't matter. You don't get to decide the validity of the answer. You can ask those 2 questions, right? That's it. And so things like, well, I get sad and sometimes the dog, that's not a trained dog, right? There has to be a task. So things like they put their paws on my chest when they feel an anxiety attack coming is a very common way that PTSD and a service dog would work, for example. So that's it. The thing is, the dog has to be controlled at all times. Training dogs do count under this law. So if someone says, I'm training this service animal, they get the same rules. The person who owns the dog is in charge of cleaning up after them. And so like if you're in a restaurant and someone's dog jumps up on the table, that's not a service dog, right? They're trained, they don't do that. But I would always, again, not legal advice, life advice, always, always, always advise you all to only push on this if you really, really need to. And spaces where you would really, really need to is if like there was I have one situation with there was a swim center and someone brought in a very big service dog and it really scared some of the kids. In that situation, would I advise them to ask these questions to make sure it was a service dog? Sure, right? Because now we have competing major issues. But when it was, the answer is how would you feel about coming to like this side of the room? That's kind of like the answer to it. I will say most people with service dogs, they get annoyed when you keep asking questions because anyone with a disability gets annoyed when people keep asking us questions about our specifics, right? But there are also, most people come in understanding, like, okay, I have this big dog, I see a kid crying, they'll move on their own, right? In most cases. Yes, ma'am. What was your question?
So I was wondering, we have rental space here at Southeast Uplift, and there was an occasion where someone wondered if it was okay to bring their emotional support dog. And so the way we handled it, and I just wonder, like, is this like, it's fine by us if they do, but what we asked them to check in with their group leader for like that coordinates the events and stuff, just to make sure that there would be no one in their group that potentially is allergic to an animal. As someone who had asthma as a child, I really identify with that. It would trigger an asthma attack. So we know that it didn't fall under a service animal, wanted to accommodate them, but also wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to then, trigger a medical event for someone else. And so was that the right way to handle it, or would there be a different way to handle it?
Yeah, I mean, so if you don't have a bright line rule and like no dogs allowed except for service animals, then that's fine, right? But understand that when you open that up, you also open up to someone bringing in a snake and someone bringing in a rat, and then that's chaos. but I will say that if you open it up, for one, it should be consistent regardless.
Yeah.
So that's why sometimes it's easier to just stick to the service dog rule and not open it up anywhere else. It creates, and really, I think, and Diane, if you want to chime in on this, when we create exceptions for people, we really leave room for those exceptions creating inequities, whether we're well-intentioned or not, right? So if you say yes, for example, let's use race as an example. If you say yes to me as a white person, and then you say no to my Black counterpart, or your coworker says no to my Black counterpart, even remember that like your organization relies on perception. So even if like you all never talked about it, one of you thought it was one way, one of you thought the other way, and it just happened that the two people were different races, or happened they were different genders or gender presenting, like that can really, and again, I'm going like far into legal stuff, but that, those kind of things, I would just create some sort of bright line how you do it. Which can be, yes, as long as the event organizer's okay with it, or just say to event organizers, any questions about animals, I'm sending them to you because we don't care. That's one way to think about it. But yeah, the allergy versus dog is really tough. And one thing to think about is that's why we have communications within our organization. So let's say, you all are working, how many people work in your building?
Oh, I'm gonna say about 12-ish.
Okay. So saying something like, one thing, you obviously don't have to disclose a disability at any point in time, but if any of you have serious dog allergies, like let's make a plan, because we know service dogs have to be allowed. If any of you have serious dog allergies, how about we talk about how we can trade off jobs that day, duties that day, and that you can work from home if we know that a service animal is coming in. They don't actually have to warn you, but that's like one way to start planning. I tell people at the city, if there's a front desk, to do that. Yeah, so that makes sense. think we'll do one more slide and then we'll take a break. Okay. All right, so basics, compliance basics. Any building built and open to the public, whether it's private business or a government business, any of that, after 1990 is supposed to be fully accessible. So sometimes people don't really understand what that means. For example, if you have a door, that the door to be accessible under the ADA, you just need to open it with less than 5 pounds of pressure. So like a sliding door isn't actually necessary under the ADA. It might be necessary under different city ordinances, but so getting into the weeds of those laws are very important, and understanding what the expectations are. There are tons of checklists on the access board. So anything prior to 1990 should make reasonable accommodations to make things more accessible. So for example, if you have a historic house that you can't change anything structurally, that has a museum and everyone can get in the first floor, but they can't get into the second floor, then maybe you create a video version of the tour upstairs and they can sit downstairs and watch it, right? So there's ways that you can make things more accessible. If you have a historic location, you check in with the historic registry's rules first. That'll direct you to the ADA, and there's some combination there. While it doesn't apply to housing units, DOJ and HUD have joint guidance on reasonable accommodations listed here, and then I think I have them at the end too. All rights of way, meaning driving and pedestrian, must be accessible. All websites must be accessible, and that's including government and private businesses. And communications must be accessible, but they can be in multiple formats so long as you're giving the same information. We'll get to that in our best practices later. This is probably, okay, yeah, what's the question?
Yeah, notice on the any building built after 1990 supposed to be accessible.
Mm-hmm.
Does that include residential?
So residential is, HUD doesn't have the same rules. The residential, this is how residential in a summation works. A person with disabilities has the ability to alter it, but that is often on their own dime. So we encourage, the buildings to be accessible in the ones built after 1990 should be accessible in their common spaces. So they should be able to get into the common room and into the office and all those things. That should be after 1990. But if you have like an apartment, for example, and you need accessible features in your apartment, you can do that on your dime. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
If it was built before 1990, then the person they can't stop you from making your own reasonable accommodations. So like, let's say you have a disability where you would need a push to open the door or a code to open the door, like something that doesn't require a lift. You could pay for it and the building can't stop you from doing it. But realistically, there's a lot of grants out there to help with paid stuff like that. All right, so we are, the difference between having a medical diagnosis.
I don't know if I worded it correctly, just
Okay.
because I don't know the difference between having like the medical diagnosis for ASD, and then I've been told like, oh, you still need to do this second part where like you have that accessibility sign, and they were like, you need to go do that portion in order to get other services for your son. I was like, I don't even know what that is. So
Yeah.
I didn't know if that's from two different entities, or just having the medical diagnosis and the educational diagnosis will help support in that sense for accessibility.
Yeah, and so so it is a multi-step interactive process, particularly when your son is in school age. So you would need to get the ASD diagnosis first, and then your school will have forms that you would need the doctor to fill out and you to fill out, and it's called, what those are called, are the interactive process. And every part of disability, employment, education, and then even if you like want to send your son to a summer camp or something like that, those will all have what's called an interactive process where you'll work to find the thing that makes the most sense for that particular program and for your son. So like, for example, pulling away from autism, but let's say like a person who is deaf really benefits from a sign language interpreter. But if you come into my office and I don't have one with me, I also have a pen and paper, right? So the modification might be that for right now, we're writing in pen and paper until I can find a sign language interpreter. And so for your son's particular diagnosis, because the spectrum of ASD is so wide, then it would need to be an interactive process to figure out what he really needs. So for example, is he an eloper and you want to go to camp, then he probably needs a personal aide or what they call a companion to attend camp with him. But if he just like, sometimes gets kind of lost in the moment and stares off into space and you just need someone to bring him back, then maybe having two camp counselors instead of one is enough. So that kind of interactive process would need to be through the whole thing. I don't really know what an accessibility sign is. Are you talking about like a parking sign or?
Yeah, like I don't know. Yes, like in that sense, the parking pass, the accessibility parking pass thing. I don't know what that. They just told me I needed to go either to like the local office, like DHS
Yeah.
office, and start that process. But I didn't understand, or Social Security office. I didn't understand what like his doctors were trying to tell me what else I needed to do in this interactive process, like you're saying. So I just was like, oh, me ask.
Yeah. So whatever the entity is you're trying to get it with, you will have to go to them too. And it won't just be like, look, my son has this. So you would go like, if you were trying to get a placard for your car because your son has mobility issues, then you would go into the DMV and you would say, how do I go about getting, like, what's your form to get my doctor to sign so that I can get a handicap, accessible placard, right? So any organization that you work with, you will have to engage in an interactive process. I have never heard of something called an accessibility sign besides that. So, or I wonder, is that for your neighborhood? Like, so you have like a kids with disabilities sign for the neighborhood?
No, I think you answered it correctly for me. In this, I
Okay.
think I wasn't processing it correctly in my mind, the way I worded it. But no, that makes sense
Okay.
because I haven't heard it input in this way, interactive process
Yeah.
with different entities. It's just mostly been in the medical sense that I've only been dealing with and a little bit educational. So I just wanted to ask you, like, if there.
Yeah.
So that's good to know. In every different entity, I will have to interact in that way, like have.
Yeah. And the more
Yeah.
that you do it, the more you'll be able to give the information. Like you'll start to see the pattern. Okay, I need to make sure they understand that he is blah, 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 whatever the symptom is. And the more like the public entity should be easier because they should just modify it. They don't need like 18 medical forms. They just need you to tell them what's going on. The private entities will need like the medical forms and kind of figure all that stuff out more.
Oh, okay. Perfect.
Not
Thank
private
you.
businesses, but schools and stuff like that.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to take how long do you want the break for? 5 minutes?
Yeah, I think 5 minutes would be enough for people to stretch your legs and grab a cup of water.
Okay. 5-minute break, people. Come back at, oh, I almost said 9:53 because that's what time it is here. See you at 6:58.
All right, so thanks for coming back, everybody. Hope you enjoyed your break. So now we're going to talk about equity and inclusion. So inclusion defined is an intentional, ongoing, with emphasis on ongoing effort to ensure that diverse individuals fully participate in all aspects of the community. It also refers to the way that diverse participants are valued as respected members of an organization and or community. So in other words, it's one thing to get people to a community engagement or to get them somewhere, get them to a meeting, get them to an event, but it's another thing to make sure that they're valued and respected in that process and that you continue to have an ongoing commitment to that thing. So oftentimes people will do like 1 or 2 initiatives because it's like a fad at the time and they won't necessarily continue it. So we really come at this from this space of you start with small manageable tasks that you can incorporate into your organization or your neighborhood association that then will contribute to a more holistic, equitable organization. So it has a myriad of benefits, especially in community engagement. You get a lot more voices into your decision-making processes. Yeah, you can move over, Jess.
With an
So
example being like vocalizing that value as well as like talking, I mean, like speaking it and enacting it too.
yeah, so one thing that we talk about in equity spaces is that you have to walk the talk, is what we call it. Maybe not the most successful thing to say, but in other words, it's one thing to be performative and put on your website, we value racial equity, we value all cultures, but then if your materials or your processes aren't aligning with those things, then that's only performative and those are only words, right? So you're not actually living your values.
I came
So-
up with it. You have to act the chat.
Act the chat. Oh,
Yeah.
nice. I like
We
that.
just trademark it. Put it on the thing.
Yeah,
Put it
act
on
the
the
chat. Can we get t-shirts that say that?
Never heard it. That's great.
So we're using the approach that we use is targeted universalism and universal design. So targeted universalism is a philosophy coined by someone named John Powell, who basically says that you should come at processes with the goal of attracting a lot of people, so a universal appeal, but as part of that, you need to make structures that for everyone to access the same outcomes. So if you create systems that cut down barriers for most of the people, everyone wins. So an example that we like to use is when you have ramps on curbs. So you see in this picture, there's a ramp there. Now the ramp helps people on bicycles. It helps people who maybe are working through the community. This happens a lot in Portland, right? We have a lot of people walking around with carts because they like to do their shopping. It helps people, individuals with physical disabilities. It can help people who maybe aren't as steady on their feet, who happen to be not as mobile. So it just contributes to a healthier community. You also notice that ramp has texture on it, which is great for individuals with visual impairments.
And also necessary coming soon because you don't have to have sidewalk paint anymore. I mean crosswalk paint. Sorry.
Thank you. Okay, so when we think about equity considerations in your community engagement processes, I just like to frame it as a who, what, when, where, how, why, and how. Just giving us a kind of a framework of thinking through things. So you need to consider, who have you invited to your event or meeting? So who's invited? Who are you missing? We'll get into that here in a second. What do attendees need to meaningfully participate? Generally, if you're doing community engagement, you have a purpose, right? So what do people need in order to get something out of it, to be able to participate, to have their voice heard, to contribute to the overall democracy of the community? When are you holding your meetings? Where are you convening community members? Why are you convening the event? So what's the purpose? And how will people engage in that community engagement opportunity? So here are the specific considerations. These are just a few. This is not an exhaustive list. Actually, Jess, could you exit out and then refresh? I refreshed something on here.
Yep. Hold please. You can
Sorry.
talk it through while I do it.
So under the who, you want to consider what kinds of cultures and culturally specific groups you would want at your event. So in other words, are there people that are usually missing that you want from the event? I can share mine too, if that helps.
I'll be up in a second, but if it's easier.
Let me see. I got it. Okay. So one thing to consider is, yeah, culturally specific groups. So are you is someone missing from the table consistently? If so, consider how you're going to outreach to them. So what do people need to meaningfully participate? So here are some things we should consider when we're designing our processes, especially if the community engagement process you are designing. If you really, there's different types of community engagement, right? Like some are for fun, some are part of the democratic governance of the city. Some are about specific issues that you want feedback on. So in order to really consider how do you get people, or like what people need to participate, well, you may need to consider if you're offering childcare. One big thing that you need to do is offer food, especially. So if this was in person from 6 to 7:30, I would really insist that there'd be food at that event. And one thing related to what Jess was saying, so Jess was talking about invisible disabilities, such as like celiac disease, like Crohn's disease. So we need to consider when we're offering food, are we offering food that is conducive to different allergies and preferences, but also food that is okay for certain religions. So some examples of that is it kosher? Is it halal? Or, you know, there's certain ethical values that may make someone eat vegan, maybe health reasons, but making sure you have those options. Especially if it's going to require a lot of emotional labor, especially on behalf of marginalized communities who do have to give their feedback a lot, you'd really have to consider how are you compensating them for their time. You also want to make sure that you have an option for people to access your spaces via public transportation, and if they can't afford it, are you offering vouchers for them to make it there? Related to accessibility, do you have captioning services? This meeting has captioning services on, right? Do you have translation services, especially if you're wanting to reach out to culturally specific groups? Say you want to talk to immigrants and refugees. Do you know how to speak those languages? If no, have a translator there. So when is a big factor as well. So you need to have awareness of major holidays and days of rest. So Southeast Uplift, you had 2 meetings this week, but you didn't have one yesterday, which is a big day for the Muslim community. Yesterday was Eid, so a lot of American Muslims in Portland were celebrating. So if you would have had this presentation yesterday, you would have already cut off so many Muslims in the area from attending. But one thing that you do, right, is you keep these online to make it accessible all the time, which is an opportunity to engage with this material asynchronously is what we call it. So on their own time. Also, it's important to avoid busy times for caretakers and families. That's very difficult to do, but if you can't do that, make sure you have childcare. Related to exploring opportunities to engage asynchronously, Southeast Uplift is already doing a great job by making these accessible after the fact. Now, if there was a situation where you wanted feedback from people and you had like a town hall or a forum, you'd want to create processes for people to give feedback from afar, from a computer, via email, via telephone call, whatever they're most comfortable with after that. That way you don't want to just say, well, you weren't at the forum, so sorry, we're not going to consider your feedback. You also want to consider where. So Jess talked a lot about ADA accessibility. You want to ensure your spaces are accessible. You want to make sure that the location you choose is easy to reach via public transportation. And another factor is sense of safety. So as you all may know, in the city of Portland, there are some areas that may not be conducive to a sense of safety for the community. So the community may not want to attend meetings there, possibly at night when it's dark out. So and why? So it's really important to have a clear purpose of your community engagement opportunities. So you don't want to just convene people and then not be clear on why you have them there. You don't want to treat people like tokens in a process. You want to make sure that you're clear about the purpose and what you're asking of them. And related to that, you also want to make sure that you're giving, you have feedback loops. And by that, that means sharing back out to people what you did with the information. How are you going to engage? So are you ensuring that deliberation and dialogue is that the space is inclusive for all to engage in deliberation and dialogue? Related to that, being aware of taking up space. So there's a term called intercultural communication. So when we dialogue, a lot of dialogue and deliberation is kind of set up right now in terms of, well, who can speak the loudest, and who can jump in and interrupt and speak. But when we think about different cultures, not all cultures are used to essentially being assertive in their speech. Some cultures will need, some different cultures, so people from different cultures may need to be asked delicately what they think. They may need more time, especially if someone's like neurodivergent as well. They may need more time for deliberation. So one trick that I have found is when I ask, is there anything else? I count down to 5 silently in my head. So that way I'm not just moving on and making people nervous. I'm giving them time to actually formulate a question that they may have. Okay. Jess, I think, does this go back to you or does it stay with me?
Yeah, unless you want to keep going. But yeah, so we have listed out for you some best practice tips in kind of the different areas that we foresaw maybe people would be part of. And so communication and outreach, first thing, get to know your community. What a lot of the miss by a lot of organizations, whether they be governmental, private, not-for-profit, or just like family even organizations, if we think about it, is we make determinations of what others need without including them in the conversation. So there are tools that you can use to start early on using your neighborhood characteristic profile that the City of Portland. Do you want to talk about that, Diane? Explain what that is. The neighborhood characteristic profile.
Yeah, I'll link it to you all because we don't really have time for that. But the City of Portland developed neighborhood characteristics profiles that can help you look at, it breaks down your stats of your neighborhood by race, by disability, by languages spoken. So all of these different aspects of your neighborhood characteristic profile can inform the way you need to design processes.
Yeah. When in doubt, use targeted universalism, meaning we're going to go to the person who needs it the most, and we're going to plan the accessibility around that. But if we know that we have 2 deaf people that come to our organization quite a bit, just hire the ASL interpreter, right? Like, make people feel like they're not a burden. And unfortunately, society makes people with disabilities feel like they're a burden a lot because we put people through a lot of hoops to get their needs met. So if you can alleviate that burden, please do. Use multiple forms of communication. Don't be afraid of low-tech options. I used the writing or option earlier, right? But the consistent messaging is the idea that we have equal access to information. So for example, within this program, you can see it, you can read it, you'll have a copy of it, we're talking, and there's all different ways that you're receiving this information, and that's really important too, as long as everyone has the same access to the full extent of the program. Still on you, right? So general examples of what accessibility consideration should be made in community engagement. How is this meeting being facilitated? What do we need to consider when planning our event? And how will we sustain our engagement with the community? Best practice tips for meeting facilitation: use multiple mediums. So talk, plus use a PowerPoint with closed captioning on, plus give handouts. That means you've covered everybody, right? Please note that we often conflate the multiple language needs and accessibility, ADA accessibility, are not the same thing. But they're both very important. So a lot of times when I ask people, what do you do for accessibility? They're like, we have Spanish interpreters, and yes, keep them, but that doesn't help. That's not a disability specific, because not speaking English is not a disability, right? Use presentation tools appropriately. So you can run accessibility checkers. We have in the resources, we have one there. Title each slide differently. So you'll see that these titles are best practice tips, meeting facilitation, instead of just having a bunch called best practice tips. That helps. Arial font is best for dyslexia. Color differentials are important. So like you'll see on the slide, some of these look, you're like, oh, this is kind of boring. It's black on white, but this is clear, right? And sometimes we got really fancy with decorations, and those decorations can inhibit other people's understanding sometimes. For event planning, the ADA National Network has a great tool, so you'll have access to this tool for temporary events, but we want to think about things like bathroom facilities, parking and drop-off areas, areas to eat and rest, display amusements and the entertainment, making sure that there's a counter people on a wheelchair can get to, and making sure that there's rest stops for the person with cerebral palsy who needs a break. Ground and floor surfaces. People put signs on the floor all the time. That is such a problem for accessibility. So get those signs off the floor. Don't be putting paper on the floor, people. And then signage says this is the, if you have two routes to get to the same place, they don't both have to be accessible, but you have to mark if only one is. You have to say accessible route on the Washington and Jefferson Street corner, right? Like you have to have that laid out. And for sustaining engagement, Diane, do you want to take this one, or do you want? This is your like bread and butter money maker.
Sure. So when we engage people, it's important to always center the whole person first. So one thing that's important in civic engagement, community engagement processes is center everybody's humanity first. Have some kinds of, especially if you're trying to cultivate inclusion, have some kinds of activities that center human connection before you just jump into the business. So some examples would be to have food. So breaking, I would say break bread, but if you have celiac disease, that's not possible. But you know, sharing a meal together is a great way. You can also incorporate get to know you style activities in the beginning of a meeting, but always think about the person first, and then think about what does a person need to feel empowered to engage in the space. So monitor your language. So you may have noticed I am saying things I'm like, oh, maybe I shouldn't say that anymore, right? So language is constantly changing. Our discourse is constantly changing. So what used to be we used to use the term handicapped a lot now we use the term accessible. When we talk about people, we don't call them handicapped, we call them individuals with disabilities. It's also important to find out what people need beforehand when possible. So if you have RSVPs, always ask, like, what kinds of considerations do you need? Ask people for feedback after programs, or even if they can't attend, ask them for feedback about why they can't attend. Engage with folks with disabilities often. So really kind of check in. It's an iterative process, meaning that you're not going to get it perfect the first time. So it's important to continue to check in and refine. And related to that, you're learning from past mistakes, so fixing them. fixing past mistakes. It's okay. It's okay to make mistakes, but all that matters is how you rise up from that. And also don't, your opinion's meaningless on the validity of someone's disability. Always assume the best of intentions. And this is where universal design goes in, because if you design your processes well, you wouldn't have to scrutinize people's disabilities anyway.
Right. And I think, a lot of times we just really think, like, I hate to say this, but you have to remove your ego from the process. Like, some of you may be doctors. I'm not a doctor, so I don't get to say whether that's a real thing for you. We really have to we have to stop thinking, I need to see it to believe it. That has to be removed from these conversations. We have to just say, you're living your experience, therefore I believe it. And that's the same with racism. That's the same with sexism. It's the same with ableism and all the other bads, right? We just have to start understanding that other people's lived experiences trumps our opinion of their lived experience. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. I'll get off my soapbox.
Well, this is your section, so.
Oh, good. I didn't even know you did. Okay. So how do we audit current processes for accessibility when within a budget? Get an expert, right? And I will say a lot of people tout themselves as ADA experts. Really start to do some background check and make sure they really know what they're talking about. You can engage with low-hanging fruit early on. So run an ADA compliance service on your website. We have a link to one in our resources. Use plain language, readable colors for flyers, signs, posters. Make sure you're in events in spaces that are accessible. And y'all, especially if you're dealing with community leaders, they love to put stuff in a historic building. Say no. No. We have to have it in a place that everyone can get in here. And everyone can't get in this space. And that's really important to say. And if not, can you provide equal access? Remember, if it's like a meet and greet with someone important, then it's not equal access to just watch it on a video, right? So having that. Keeping running list of what needs to be fixed. In government, we call this a transition plan. And so keep a list like, oh, we really need to pay attention to this, needs to come next on the list. If for some reason you're found in violation under the Department of Justice or under HUD, you will benefit from having, oh, we have this list. This is how we've been fixing them so far. This is our plan. Fixing particularly physical issues, and having a transition plan is important. And then you can check in with your local ADA centers. When the ADA was written, they made centers across the country. I think there's 10 of them. The Northwest one is in Washington State. And that information is at the bottom. You can call them for literally anything, and they have experts that will help you. I call my ADA center all the time. I'm like, hey, I just want to double check that this is 2 parking lots, not 1, right? And they know the answer. So they're great resources.
All right. And when we think about how to audit your current processes for equity, so like I mentioned before, your neighborhood characteristics profile can help you a lot in assessing how well you're doing. So look at your past engagement and think who is missing from your table. So for instance, in the Reed Neighborhood Association, who's on the board? Who does that reflect everyone who's in the neighborhood characteristics profile? If not, like, it's not reasonable to assume your board is going to have one representative from each category, right? But if one group's maybe overrepresented on your board, but you're noticing that you have a lot of another group in your neighborhood, who's missing? Who needs to be included? Are they included in decision making? If they're not on the board, how else are you engaging with them? Also, it's important to audit your current materials, especially if you have a high population of individuals who don't speak English as a first language, that we call them English learners. Really think about what materials you would need to translate. It's also important to review your current partnerships. So what community organizations would be beneficial for you to partner with and start collaborating with to tap into the communities they already serve and essentially start building trust with them. What feedback are you already getting? So for instance, if someone's saying, I can't make this meeting, why can't they make the meeting? Is it because that's when they're bringing their kids to soccer practice? Is the meeting happening during when they're working? Like, think through what feedback you're getting and then how can you adjust? And also think about, can you meet people where they already convene? So we're social groups, right? Humans are social animals. So where are humans already convening in your neighborhood, and can you just kind of capitalize on that by hosting an event where people are already naturally gathering? So we don't have time to get through this today, but when you consider how to get started, we want you to consider these elements. So I'm just going to go through them. It spells out SMARTY. So is it specific? So what is the exact thing you want to achieve? So here are some examples of some exact things you may want to achieve in your own organization, in your board, in your neighborhood. Is it measurable? So what are indicators that you reach their goals? So you reach your goals. So like maybe seeing more young families at events, maybe having materials printed in the safety harbor languages, which are these are essentially languages that the city of Portland has deemed that there's a population in the city of Portland that is high enough to need materials in those languages. Having a higher score on your website with running an accessibility checker. You also need to consider, is it attainable? So are your goals too lofty? If so, adjust them. Is it realistic? So are you setting yourself up for failure before you even begin? Remember, I mentioned earlier, this is an incremental process. Timely. So when you set these goals, always make sure you specify a time frame. So within a month, within 6 months, within a year, we want to have this completed. Oh, I did that twice. Inclusive. So really consider, what groups are you specifically targeting and who are you leaving out? So think about, how are you involving underrepresented and historically excluded voices, and how are you sharing that power? Finally, is it equitable? Meaning, how does it seek to address systemic injustice, inequality, or oppression? So in other words, what is the purpose of your goal? How will it benefit historically underserved communities? So thinking through all these things, and then designing a goal, and we'll upload a worksheet to help you think through that.
I put it in the chat.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So we're going to close out with a video. I do want to make you aware that there is cursing in this video. So if you know, your kids are around. This video was created by Core Down, which is a group that aims to bring more awareness to the potential of people with Down syndrome. It's in Canada, so that's why half the organization stuff is in French. And but they did this awesome video for World Down Syndrome Day that I'm obsessed with.
I had to stop so I can optimize for video clip.
Oh yeah. See, Zoom, we get confused.
Oh, it's not letting me do that. Oh, it does now. Okay.
Hey bartender, you assume that I cannot drink a margarita, so you don't serve me a margarita? So I don't drink a margarita. Your assumption becomes reality. And parents, you assume that I cannot live on my own, so you don't encourage me to live on my own, so I don't live on my own. Coach, you assume that I cannot hit harder, so you don't train me to hit harder, so I don't hit harder. And teacher, you assume that I cannot learn Shakespeare, so you don't teach me Shakespeare.
Old MacDonald had a farm,
so I don't learn Shakespeare. E-I-E-I-O. But hey, if all your assumptions become reality, then assume that I can drink a margarita. You serve me a margarita, so I drink a margarita. assume that I can live on my own. So I live on my own. Assume that I can hit harder. So I hit harder. Assume that I can learn Shakespeare. So, what fools these mortals be! I learned fucking Shakespeare. You assume I can swear, right? Assume that I can do that job. That I can go to parties. That I can have sex. That I can be on stage. Assume that I can. So maybe I will.
Yeah, I think that makes a great point about how our assumptions guide our behaviors. So you need to start by assuming the best in people and start by assuming people can be empowered. Jess, any closing thoughts?
No, we have some resources for you all, and just we're here, like, we don't need to run off if you have questions for us, but we are cognizant that you have spent your time with us tonight, and we appreciate that. There are a couple slides that I'm just going to throw up real quick.
Hey, bartender.
Oh no, that's not, sorry.
This one?
Yeah, so there's some resources. It's coming in real blurry. I don't know why. Okay. And then the next slide is Southeast Uplift. Oh, those are contact information. Please feel free to reach out if you have any further questions. And the last slide is SE Uplifts reminder.
Yeah, just a reminder that you can sign up for other trainings in the Back to Basics. The next one is Thursday, April 18th, so 1 week from today. And thank you all for being here tonight. I'm so glad you could attend.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you. Thank you.